Hey everybody, Guy here from Chit Chat. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. I just got done recording a really, really fun podcast with Amy Degerstrom, who is the executive director. Did I say that right? Executive director at the Stearns County History Museum. Mm-hmm. And we talked about Stearns County. We talked about the history here. We talked about things that they have on display there. And more importantly, kind of why history is important and why it's good for a community to preserve things. It was very fun and very interesting. I'm excited for you to hear it now. And more importantly, I hope that you go. At the end of this, I hope you take the opportunity to go and check out what Amy and her team are doing at the History Museum, and also what we're doing. This story belongs to us. It's our people and the people that have gone before us here in our community. So I hope you're encouraged to go and do that. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Amy, thank you so much for coming and joining us on the podcast today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Amy, would you introduce us? Tell us who you are and what you do.
Sure. I'm Amy Degerstrom, and I am the executive director at the Stearns History Museum.
Wonderful. And how long have you been at the History Museum?
I'm just about in year 7. Mm-hmm. I've been the director for just over a year, and I was hired originally as the development director.
All right.
Yeah.
Neat. If people haven't been to the History Museum before, if they've never been over there, if they've never seen your exhibits, what's something that you would want people to know about the History Museum?
I think that for me, any museum is meant to be a community space. So the history and that museum belong to all of you. They don't belong to me. They don't belong to us that work there. Mm-hmm. We're kind of the caretakers of things, but it's meant to be an open and welcoming and accessible space. Our museum is free if you live in Stearns County, so you can come anytime. And I think that we change our exhibits a lot. Mm-hmm. And also to note that the museum is not just that building, that we do lots of things all over the county. Yeah. So history really isn't contained to one space, never has been, never will be. Mm-hmm. So I always tell people that, we don't think about history after we finish high school, maybe, unless you work in history. But it's happening all around you all the time. And so just be, I guess, maybe aware of that and understand that our building is a place for you to go and experience it, but maybe not the limit, right?
Yeah, that's great. This past December was Holly Ball's 50th anniversary.
It was.
And you guys had a super fun exhibit with outfits and not costumes, just the dresses and the attire from over the years.
Yeah.
What was it like to kind of work with Centricare on putting together kind of a unique
Yeah, it was lots of
exhibit?
Fun. I think we like to tell people the origins of things, I guess. And Holly-Ball is one that's just been around so long that sometimes we just take for granted that it exists, right? Yeah. But it was really fun, especially to talk to the people who were sort of the originators of that event, some of whom are still living and who came in to visit their dress, right? And it was lots of fun to work with Centricare. They did the bulk of the work for that exhibit. Okay. We were more of a space provider / here are some mannequins and stands and materials, and helped to put it up. But we had the benefit of hosting it and therefore talking to all the people who came to see it. So it was a lovely way for us to gather stories and history of that event as well.
And then that exhibit went from your space actually to, or at least a chunk of it went to Holly Ball.
Yeah, it all went there.
Okay, yeah. And when I saw it, one of the things I was like, how is this dress still here? The first dress, the dress that was the oldest, how did she still have it? And how did she know or remember that this was what she wore at Holly Ball? How did that process kind of go of figuring out what pieces to put in?
Right. I think that when we were first talking about it, the idea was, okay, we sort of want one example from each era, maybe each decade, right? And I think that you would be amazed what people keep. Okay. I think we have people show up with things. We just had someone last week that brought in a dress from the 1890s. They were like, "Oh, I found this in a trunk in my mom's house."
Wow.
So I think,
did you guys take it?
We did that one, yeah. So I think that again, we don't always think about things from the 70s and 80s being history, but whether we want to admit it or not, it is at this point, right?
Technically speaking, yesterday is history.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think often things come in generationally. So, I am a child of the 80s and I just cleaned off my parents' farm. So then that's when the things come out. And your parents might have things from their parents and their grandparents and maybe their great-grandparents. So you've sometimes got 3, 4, 5 generations of things in people's houses. And when they need to move or downsize or pass away, that's often when they think about the History Museum.
Right.
Because they're like, well, I don't want to throw this away. I don't want to be the one to throw it away.
It feels important, but I don't want it.
Right.
Is there somebody that does?
Can I bring it somewhere? Yeah. And we clearly can't say yes to everything.
Yeah.
And we have a really large collection, like about 30,000 objects that we care for. So we really have to be selective about what we take. But it doesn't mean that you shouldn't ask, because often the things that get thrown away are the things we really want, because the things that we use every day are the things people don't keep. So while wedding dresses are lovely, we really don't need them anymore unless they're like from
historical
this year
or
they're from a certain period in history that had some significance.
Do you guys have a parachute dress from World War II?
We have many.
Yeah, of course.
We have many. But we might be interested in the decorations you had at your wedding in 1945 because people don't keep those, right? Or we might be interested in the invitation that you sent to people, or the picture of you on your wedding day, or maybe the hotel key where you stayed on your honeymoon. I mean, those kinds of things that we just all take for granted and use every day, to me, sometimes are the most interesting parts of history because we take them for granted. We don't think about saving them. So
they felt disposable a long time ago. And so the likelihood of them surviving to today gets slimmer and slimmer and slimmer.
Exactly.
Whereas the dress, of course, let's keep
we're
grandma's dress.
We're going to keep it in a box and put it in a cedar chest. And then now what do I do with it, right? And it doesn't mean that those dresses aren't important.
Yeah.
But they're important to you and to your family. So let us help you figure out how to preserve it. We can do that. But we might not want to have it in the collection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What percentage of things that are brought do you guys end up keeping, do you think?
I'd say maybe 15, 20.
Yeah.
Again,
are people ever hurt? Is there emotion attached to?
Yeah, we aim for them not to be when they come in. We try very hard to explain why we may or may not take something. Clearly, our purpose is local history. So if it's not from Stearns County, that's an automatic, I'm sorry, we can't take it.
As cool as it is.
Yeah, unless it's purposely for an exhibit and we just want to use it for that display and then give it back to you, right? But otherwise, that's the baseline. And sometimes people feel upset because, again, they don't want to be responsible for getting rid of it. I think there's a guilt level there.
Yeah.
I mean, I have that with my own family stuff sometimes. So
but if you give it to a history museum, you get to kind of absolve yourself of the fact that you didn't want it because it's going to a better place.
Right. Well, and we do very clearly tell people when they sign over custody of their object that it doesn't mean we're going to keep it.
Yeah.
Because part of our process is to take something, look
Evaluate.
at it, compare it to the other things in the collection, look at its condition, what story is attached to it. At this point, because the museum's been collecting for so long, we really have a criteria for what the thing needs to be for us to take it into the collection.
Yeah.
Just from a stewardship level, we don't want to take it if we can't take care of it.
Right.
We don't want to take it if we can never use it, if no one will ever see it. If we don't have a story attached to it, then we're probably not going to take it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's just say somebody brings in a wedding dress that has cultural, historical, local significance, and you're like, yeah, we do want to keep that.
Yep.
And it comes with story. Yep. How do you keep something ethereal, like a story, attached to a specific item? So that when you guys are done, right? Like you're done and gone, years from now, you're no longer there, and any of the current staff, like how do you make sure that that stuff transcends current staff?
We have catalog systems, right? So software where everything that comes into the building, once we decide we're going to keep it, Then our registrar, who's our three-dimensional collections person, will take that object in the back and they'll photograph it and they'll measure it and they'll decide what's the best way to house it. So what kind of box does it need? What kind of supports does it need? Does it need any kind of conservation or preservation? And then part of that is also to explain all of that in our collections management system, so that, again, the next person that comes along can look that item up. Every item gets a number. It's called an accession number and a location. So this is number 2024-87, and it's on shelf 7B in offsite storage, wherever it is. So that, again, in theory, whoever comes next could go find the thing.
Are keywords attached to it?
Yes.
So in a database,
Yep.
1920s ball gown or something like that.
Yep.
And you can see if you have that.
Right. Yeah. There's, a whole system of nomenclature for museum collections. So you can read many books about it if you want to. But, and it's called control language. So it's a way for you to search. But that control language can be very specific. So we don't have, World War II 8 different ways. It's always the same way, right? So that when you search World War II spelled out, you'll find all the things. When our current registrar first started, that was not the case. So we've worked really hard in the last couple of years through a grant from the State Historical Society to clean that up. We had the ability to hire a couple of temporary staff, and that's literally what they did. They went through all the records, they updated that language, they took better pictures, all of those things. And then our goal in the coming year is that some of those things can now be searchable online. So you can see the object, read about the object. So if your grandma donates her wedding dress and we actually take it and you live in Kansas,
you could actually show
you could see it, right? Yeah.
What are some of the strangest things that have come in?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. The one that everybody asks for all the time is the two-headed pig, which has been on display now it'll go away again. It kind of rotates in and out.
Yeah. You want to keep it special.
Yeah, we can't have it out all the time. Anyway, so that one's a common one. I mean, I think strange and interesting are kind of the same to me. So we have a lot of hair art. Hair art is a Victorian thing. So in the 19th century, think about the fact that death was a lot closer to people, meaning it happened more often.
In your home.
It happened in your home. You had the funeral, the wake in your home, etc. So people were just a lot closer to it. And one of the physical ways that people would remember their family, because again, photography is still pretty new, pretty expensive. Maybe you'd never get a picture of the person. So one of the ways you would remember them is that women, when they were doing their hair, had these little dishes on their vanity that were called hair catchers, and that's literally what it was. So you take the hair, you put it in the thing. And when someone dies, your daughter, your sister, etc., would take that hair and they would weave it into these beautiful wreaths sometimes, or brooches or necklaces or whatever. So they look like flowers mostly. If you don't know what it is, you wouldn't know that it was hair, right?
Wow.
And then you would display it. And it was like your way to remember, physically remember that person.
Yeah. Like a tangible portrait almost.
Yeah. Now we have so many pictures of people and so many ways to remember them.
That
was
so
not
foreign.
The case, So this was the one way that you could do that. So I think that's really beautiful and really interesting in its own way, but it also creeps people out sometimes, because it feels odd.
Are they ever on display?
Yeah, there's one up right now.
Okay.
By the two-headed pig.
Okay.
And we rotate them out now and then, depending on the scene.
Do you have a portrait? Is there do you have any for some of these hair portraits or whatever?
Yeah.
Do you have any actual portraits of the person?
A few.
And the hair art?
A few, although not so very many. Yeah. Often, again, in that time period, it just wasn't so common that you had pictures.
Yeah.
That's also the era of postmortem photography, because again, maybe that's the only one you'll ever have, right? Especially common with children.
Yeah. Propped up.
Yeah. So, I think that's a really fascinating thing. But also I understand why people think it's kind of morbid, I guess. But yeah. Otherwise, we get a lot of things that I think, why did you think to bring this here? pieces of insulation made out of newspaper, which was a thing at one time, but it's old and dirty and gross, and I'm not going to take it, right? Or, somebody's dentures, someone brought those once, which again, there's a history to that.
Yep.
I'm not sure I want the DNA attached to it, right? So people bring things that are curious in terms of why they think they should bring them. Again, I often think it's a guilt. I don't want to dispose of this. And sometimes they will say that to us. And then we will say, okay, well, if we take it, we're not going to keep it. Well, that's okay.
Yeah.
You throw it away, basically. I don't want to.
Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we just are helping people through that. And often when they bring things, they're also maybe in the process of grieving somebody.
Yeah.
And so it's lots of layers attached to donating things.
When my wife and I got married, we were gifted a Bible that was from my wife's grandparents.
Okay.
A really nice, really sweet gesture. I think it was the Bible that was given to them on their wedding day. It was, of course, inscribed inside with names and stuff. We didn't really think anything of it, but it was a book on our shelf that was that we just didn't need or want. It had this history. It had this history attached to it.
Right.
We didn't feel guilty. We felt like maybe should we feel guilty, but we don't need to keep this.
Nope.
And so we were donating a bunch of books, and we brought all of these books to the Christian school in town, and one of these books that was in this pile was a Bible.
Okay.
And there was a woman who was on the receiving end of all of these books, kind of going, in a more unofficial way, doing what you guys do. Is this something that the school needs or wants? And in here was this Bible, and she opens it, and these were dear friends of my, old friends or something. I forget the connection. And she calls my wife's grandparents, you're in luck. You're in luck. Somehow I found your Bible.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so this very strange, this phone call comes. We found, the Bible we gave, we found it. And anyway, it was a unique thing, thing after passing this thing on.
Right. And then it came back to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That happens too. I think family dynamics also impact if people want us to have things or don't. So sometimes someone will give us something, and then, that person passes away, and then a sibling says, well, I never wanted you to have it. Well, but they did, and they've signed it over. So we're not going to give it back to you or your family. That's not how it works. Yeah. And so sometimes that comes into play too, how dare you give whatever, right, to them. Not as often as positive things, but it can happen.
I've been to the museum a number of times. It's always so fun to go and see. Last year, I was a part of the Chamber Leadership Program.
Yep.
And we spent a really good chunk of our day, hearing from you guys and then other people that are kind of adjacent to history, or actively working in history in some kind of capacity in our community. And Brendan Duffy, who was a podcast guest, that's where I heard him speak about Centricare's history and how they have an archivist. I learned on that day that businesses would think about that. I had never quite thought about that before, that maybe an organization wants to preserve their history enough, but it was so fun on that. I think of the whole Chamber Leadership Program, I think that day, it was one of the best days, hearing all of the different people come. There's something about when you kind of hold history for people, there's something that's really fun and kind of passionate about that. And so all of the speakers that day did such a good job in doing that. But on that day, I had been to the museum many times, but something I had never got to do before, and the reason I bring it up is that I didn't know that there was an offsite building.
Yeah.
So what you can see at the main history, there are tons of things in the museum itself. And then kind of as you're walking, every once in a while, there'll be a door open. And you're like, oh my word, there's a lot here. And so I'm thinking to myself, wow, there's a lot of stuff here. And then you go to this giant offsite.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh my word. And like part of it was cool and also overwhelming of just like, how on earth, I think it's why I asked the question of like, how do you kind of keep track of it? But just how many different things. And this section is strollers and this section is musical instruments. And just, it was so fascinating. So I don't know if people can, but if you ever get a chance to go and see the offsite space, it's remarkable.
Yeah, we do public tours of it about twice a year.
Yeah.
So you can follow our social media and you'll find them there. It's really one of my favorite things to show people, I think for a few reasons. One, because just volume of stuff. Two, the fact that over the course of the, 80-year history of the Historical Society, somebody brought us all of those things and thought, hey, we should keep this. Like, this seems important, or this seems like we might want to remember it. That's amazing to me. So just the, again, volume of people that were attached to those objects or those things. And then I also think it does really help people understand what we do. I mean, I think that's one piece of what we do, but it's a really visible piece of what we do. And understand, like, what the challenges are for being the people who are caring for that history, both from a just practical standpoint. So the space, the money that it takes to do that preservation, the staff that it takes to do that preservation, and then also the logistics. So as you said, it's across Heritage Park. So if we want to do something in an exhibit, right now we have an exhibit called Wayfinding, and it has lots of big pieces in it. So it has a sleigh and a buggy and, a lot of the vehicles. That was a 3-week process to get all of them moved from there to there. And so I think, and the kind of odd things that we have, we have a ton of milking equipment, for example, because Stearns County is dairy, right? But my goodness, those things are heavy. And like, how do you take care of them and make sure they don't rust and make sure, so there's lots of things that you have to know to take care of history as well.
When you're moving things, no matter how careful you are, right? There is some metric, there is some equation in relationship to every time you touch something, every time you move something, its long-term viability or its quality is going to deteriorate.
Right.
How do you kind of manage we're going to move this big, heavy thing. There's potential and almost assured potential that in some capacity, this thing will deteriorate a little bit because of what we're going to have to do to get it to the museum in relationship to, but if it just sits here, it also is no good.
Sure.
So how do you kind of wrestle with maybe the impact that preservation could actually have negatively on it in relationship to, but people need to see it so that we can remember it.
Right. I mean, I think that there are certain objects that we just don't ever move because we know that their integrity will fail. Sure. Right. And part of the job of a history museum is also just that intrinsic preservation. So if someone is, writing a book about a certain kind of furniture and we have an example from a maker that's very unique to this area, there's value in us just having the thing. Because otherwise the thing goes away and doesn't exist, and we have no existing examples, right? So that preservation is also part of our job. I think as a whole, if I had my way, we would show people a lot more than we get to, just simply because of space, and we also have to rotate things regularly because lighting impacts the integrity of objects. Humidity, climate impacts the integrity of objects. So we never have anything on display longer than about 12 months, maybe 2 years. If it's metal, for example, that's a little less likely to break down than something that's fabric, for example. So part of the job of the exhibit staff is also to think about that. So if we put this thing up, how long can it stay up? And then what comes next, right? So it's something that we're always thinking about. And I think in terms of moving objects, the thing to think about too is that if it is an object that is meant to move, so for example, a buggy, a car, a whatever, as we all know, it's not great for that thing to just sit. That's actually worse for it sometimes than to have it move, because if it's a non-motorized vehicle, the grease dries up, the oil dries up in a car, et cetera, right? So it's actually good for those bigger things to move once in a while. And I think that's part of our thought process too is, okay, so every 4 or 5 years, one of these needs to go out so that it's not just drying up. And especially if it's wood, it gets brittle. We have humidity and climate control in parts of that building for that purpose. But, that only does so much too. So if things are meant to move, they should move sometimes, right? Even if they're old.
So many of the things that come in, their value, I'm thinking of like old milking equipment, right? Like there's no financial value attached to so much of that, but it has other kinds of value because of what it, the commentary on our people and our time, or, on times before us.
Yeah.
But every once in a while, I'm sure that there are things with like real monetary value that come in.
Yep.
How do you like protect or preserve those things in relationship to the fact that like this just has a different kind of actualized monetary value in comparison to some of these other things?
So I guess for us, monetary value is insignificant. Like we don't really think about it. We have to think about it in terms of insurance, I guess, right? But in terms of the object, unless somebody says, I'm giving you this thing and it's worth $3 million and you can sell it, okay, that's one thing, right?
Bring those things on.
Yeah,
everybody.
Come on in. Bring them over because we could use them, to preserve all the other things. But for the most part, the person who donates it is the one who assigns it a value if they want to for their taxes, but we never do that. We never provide monetary value or estimates to people because it's just really not our purpose.
Yeah.
Now, there are some things that just intrinsically, again, need a certain kind of climate control, for example. So our archives, which is the two-dimensional collection, has its own standing humidity and climate control system that's different than the rest of the building because paper and pictures and negatives and film break down more quickly and need different kinds of controls. So if you are really hot in the summer, come ask for an archives tour because it's really cold in there, right? But it's, so I think some of it is that too, that we just have to think about the care of that thing more so than monetary value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a thought? What's the rarest item? Like if this thing just poof, it went away, there's no ability to get this thing or anything like it. Milking equipment is not rare.
Not milking equipment. No, we'll find more of that in barns. I would say probably the photographs in our collection are perhaps the most intrinsically valuable, just simply because once they're gone, they're gone.
Sure.
And we've worked really hard to digitize some of those, but that's an ongoing process too. So I'd say there's, we do have some Native American objects in our collection that are our earliest history, at least in terms of people.
Yep.
So I'd say those are probably up there. There are some religious objects that are from very early, pre-settlement kind of points in our history that I would think would be up there too.
Yeah.
So like if the museum was on fire, what would you grab kind of, right? I'd say probably some of those really early things.
And the two-headed pig.
And the two-headed pig,
That's right.
clearly.
Yep.
I mean, it's the most important. I could fit that in my backpack and be okay. Yeah.
Can I ask you about the big animal exhibit?
You bet.
It's so cool. And I think like it's the kind of thing that my kids probably like the most, right?
Yes.
Like I maybe want to go and see some of the other things that are maybe a little bit more obscure or something, some fun story. And then the animal exhibit, it's so big, right? Sometimes it's like when I'm there, it's such a big installation. It feels like it can't come out.
Right.
And so everything else is like being rotated. It's like this kind of like thoughtfulness associated with like, we're going to bring these things in, but it takes such a big footprint that, and it feels like it can never change because of just how intentional that installation is.
Right.
How do you guys kind of think about that section of the museum in relationship to the fact that limited square footage, which means limited exhibits, et cetera, in relationship to this thing that is always there?
Yeah, so we have two exhibits that are permanent. So the natural history exhibit and the granite exhibit, because they were built spaces when the building was built. And so our solution to that is that we rotate the objects that are in those exhibits.
Okay.
The exhibits themselves, the layout, how they look is really never going to change, again, because they were built in.
Yeah.
But the objects change.
Okay.
So some of them stay forever. Like we only have one bear, for example. So the bear stays, but the bear is purposefully in a dark part of that exhibit so that he's not exposed to light. He doesn't get broken down as often.
Yeah.
There's a little door so we can dust him, that kind of stuff. Those
Does
objects.
the bear have a name?
No, he should maybe.
Yeah,
huh?
A permanent
We
piece.
probably should name him, yeah.
That should be like, you
Maybe
should do
that's an all call. Give me some names.
100%. You should do a social, some sort of social thing.
Maybe we should.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that sounds great.
So some of those larger ones that we have one example of just stay. We do clean that exhibit, on a regular basis. Cleaning taxidermy is a very specific skill. So,
Small little vacuums.
Yeah, our interns end up doing that usually for us because they can crawl around in there. But so I think that one, it looks the same when you see it, but it really isn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So things do move and shift.
Yeah.
Similarly for granite, the objects in that exhibit shift and change. Again, most of them are very similar. So if you're a regular visitor, you might not notice.
Yeah.
But they do. The heavy things in that exhibit don't tend to change so much. But, again, giant chains are going to be fine. Like, it's okay if they have some light on them.
Yeah.
So I guess they do change, just not as readily. They're always going to be those things, though.
Yeah.
They're not going to be a new theme or anything.
I think the toy exhibit was really fun.
That was a fun one.
Was it kind of it seems like a kind of thing that would be a draw. Was it kind of a hit for the museum?
It was a hit, yeah. Yeah, it was. And that one was up for quite a long time. The fun thing about that is that we have an enormous collection of toys, at least like 1980s and back. So again, if you have things that are newer than that, we'd probably like those things.
Interesting.
I bought a Poppet for the museum collection because every kid is going to remember that. And
again, the thing that you don't think about.
But they throw it away, So anyway, so stuff like that, that's super popular at a certain era.
Yeah.
And again, the newer ones are probably more likely to end up in our collection than not. But the toy exhibit was fun because we had so many, so we could just keep rotating them. So, every 6 months or so, we would just put some new things out. We had someone who donated an entire Star Wars collection in its original packaging. Like, that's super cool. And
some value, back to that, like, obviously there's like some monetary value attached to stuff like that.
Yeah. So, those exhibits also are good collections builders for us. So, for example, right now in that same space where toys is a 1980s exhibit, because that was the theme of our year this year because of our anniversary. We really had to ask people. We had to build that collection because we just didn't have it yet. You're not thinking about it as a 80s as history, right?
This is an idea or a concept that it just feels so foreign that like the thing that is, or maybe it means at the age of 39, just like it's a signifier that I am getting older,
right?
Because all of these things of my childhood are actually the things that the History Museum is looking for.
Yeah, right. I know it's kind of a wild thing. It's a good reminder though to people that everybody's lifetime is history.
That's right.
And will be history moving forward. And I think, so the 80s exhibit was fun because we went on the news in the cities and we went on with the radio and kind of all over and said, all right, here are the things we need. And the hardest thing to find, which is, again, another thing people threw away, was acid wash jeans, stone wash jeans.
Everyone's kicking themselves right now.
Everybody had them.
Yep.
Nobody kept them.
Because they're so cool.
Yep.
And you can resell them for lots. And
So, it's funny stuff like that that we're like, well, so then, our like Ramones guy with his mohawk has to wear Levi's because we couldn't find acid wash jeans. So it's stuff like that again, you're like, oh, nobody's going to want this.
Yeah.
That's the stuff we want.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Well, hopefully, if nothing else, listeners, if you're going to take just one thing away, that thing from the 80s that you're about to put in the garbage, just maybe that's the thing that's actually, that's maybe the thing that they want more than anything.
Or the 90s or the 2000s, again, I do it all the time. And I've got little kids and I give their stuff away all the time because I'm like, oh, I want it out of my house. But every now and then I pause and I'm like, okay, what out of this is something that's become more popular than I thought it would.
Yeah.
Or that every kid knows about, okay, maybe that's the thing.
Was there a Tickle Me Elmo in the toy exhibit?
Oh, you bet.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. Again, it just seems like its cultural significance was so huge.
Yeah. So, like wrestling figurines, those were huge. And like one of our staff had some of those, which is great. Cabbage Patch Kids,
G.I. Joes.
G.I. Joes.
That was like my entire childhood.
Trapper Keepers.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, my husband's childhood ended up in our exhibit because we were cleaning off his parents' farm at the time we were building it. So, Yeah, so you just never know. But that everyday stuff I think is really interesting.
What are some of the needs that the museum has, and how could people get involved in maybe helping preserve our community?
I think that, beyond just the stuff that you might be interested in donating, we clearly need the money to preserve that stuff. So we have different ways for people to do that. You can just be an annual sponsor, annual donor. So that can be a monthly gift. That can be a one-time gift. We have an endowment. We always ask people to donate to that because that supports the kind of daily operations. We are always looking for volunteers. So if you have interest in history and or like you really like to fix things and you want to just kind of putz around the museum and help us build stuff and paint walls and whatever, we're always looking for people doing that.
So you don't even need to be like a history buff necessarily. There's ways to get involved.
We have a whole slew of people who help with our gardens and who do things like sit at the front desk and greet people and answer the phone and fold letters. Just like any other business, we have all those things that need to happen too. We have a lot of volunteers who do research center help, and that's a popular one. Collections, 3D collections is another one, So, if you have interest in or you're good at, again, a specific kind of thing like wood carving or, paint, like detailed painting or that could help us with some of that restoration. Anybody want to do some neon signs? We'd have those to fix, So there's a really huge variety of ways you can help. So just call and ask. So I think be a member. Membership helps us with our daily costs, like the heat and the lights. And as a member, you also get lots of really cool invites to all of our events, and you get to have our newsletter and kind of be in the know about stuff. And membership is pretty cheap, so that's a good way too.
I bet that you are a treat to have on a trivia team.
Yeah,
I bet
our staff is the best trivia team ever. For the most,
ringers.
I'm not gonna lie. We're really good at it.
The Stearns County History Museum trivia team. Look out if you see them rolling in to the next trivia event.
I have to bring my husband is a FIAD and health guy, so he's got to come for the sports because we're not very good at the sports, but the rest of it.
You know your limitations,
right?
And you've shored up some resources for it. That's
exactly.
Good. Can I ask you a question about this building that we're in?
Sure.
Okay. We bought this building 6 months ago, and everybody refers to it as the Thielen building.
Yep.
On the nameplate on the front of this building that was started in 1899, I think completed in 1900, maybe 1901. This building, everyone says the Thielen building because on the big nameplate at the top of the building is Thielen.
Yep.
That was a guy that bought the building
later,
almost 100 years later. So we own this building now. I could take the nameplate off of that building, and I could put my name or one of my business partners' names, or we could put the word switchboard. We could technically do that, but it feels weird. It feels odd.
Right.
Is that a thing that every time I see it, I think about it doesn't feel right. Am I weird in that, or does?
No, I think that for me, I guess names on buildings, they change all the time.
Okay.
So it's not so odd. But I also, as a history person, I love it if people leave them because I think it's a layer of the story of that space. Yeah. So whether that's the original person or not, I mean, just like now, if you're a big corporate entity and you build a fancy building, your name's probably going to be on it somewhere. And people who take it over may or may not change it. I think if it's a more modern building, it's more common that it gets changed, right? Because you're rebranding and all of that.
That building's not on the historic registry.
Right, yeah. I think for the older buildings, not unlike buildings now, the people that paid for those buildings wanted people to know that they paid for those buildings. Right. This is my symbol of success, right? And so those carved nameplates were really common. And some of them stayed the original forever, and some of them changed depending on who bought it. So it just depended on the company. I like when they stay. Yeah. I think it's a layer of history. It maybe gets someone to ask you a question about the building and about the kind of preservation of that space.
I don't know what it would cost because the one that's up there is I think in granite. So I don't know what that costs yet. But I've thought about at some point I wonder if we should we've got these old photos of it. Could we update it back to something that looks like the original one? I think that would be a fun little little nod.
Yeah.
Even like, I don't know, we're in this old building. We own this old building.
Right.
But I kind of feel like a steward of the building.
Right.
This wall that we're kind of sitting against, there's a whole bunch of it. And on occasion, as we walk down the stairs, people have asked like, oh, will you ever paint that wall? And my response is always like, I don't have any clue how many people owned this building before I did, but they all resisted that urge to paint that wall. And I don't know if I feel like I'm going to be the one to cover up this granite brick here that has been in this spot for 125 years.
Right.
And even like, we have a sign up on the wall. It says Shifts. In the 50s, there was a shoe store here called Shifts.
Yep.
And when we bought the building, that big metal sign that we now hung, it was just in the basement. And I think there's something fun about the fact that all the people that have owned this building since that time, they have walked in this same basement and seen that sign sitting in the basement collecting dust.
Right.
And no one threw it away.
Right.
There's something about it that seems like, I know it has some kind of importance or value, and so like we're not going to do it. And so as we were cleaning the basement, there was no chance I was going to be the guy to throw it away.
Right.
And then we hung it on the wall,
which is awesome.
Cool old type and from the 50s, so super fun. But it's kind of an honor to like be a steward of this old building. And
it is. Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. You know, we're such a throwaway, tear down society in America. We just are. Capitalism and all that. You know, so I love it when people choose to not do that and to repurpose old spaces. I know it's a lot harder to do sometimes than to build something new. Yeah. But again, like you said, we're all just sort of stewards of space, right? Yep. We're all just sort of the people who are taking care of it for now and hope that it can be taken care of by someone else next. Yeah. And so I think it's a great thing. And I think, again, all those pieces are the story of that space. And that's what makes old buildings really cool, you know, much cooler than like the, sheetrock and metal new ones that have their own history and interesting story. But I love old buildings. I think they're great.
It's cool.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, did you call it an all call for the bear? Is that what you called it? All call?
Sure. Yeah.
If you do that, could I come and take a portrait?
Of course.
A really fun, like kind of special portrait.
Yeah.
And then you use that for it would be, if you do it, it would be so fun to like just be a part of that. And I'll capture a really fun portrait of his face.
I think that'd be awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we should do it.
Absolutely.
It'll be fun to see what all the names that kind of pour in for that.
It will.
And then how do you do it? Do you pick or do you then have people vote? Like what's the best way to kind of do that?
We'd probably vote. Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think we'd vote.
Do you know about Bodie McBoatface?
Yes. The plows, right?
No.
Oh, no, that's a different naming.
Bodie McBoatface was a National Geographic ship.
Oh, that's
exploratory ship.
Yes, I remember.
And it was kind of like early days of like social media fandom and all that stuff. And they did this thing like name the boat, name the ship. And they did this thing and Bodie McBoatface destroyed. And I think they had a really neat opportunity to like let the internet win.
Yeah.
Let people who aren't normally invested in your idea at all, they showed up here. I think it would have been an awesome thing to allow it. But you got to be ready. If you're going to do the vote thing, it's kind of like, do you trump it because it's not?
Right, you know. I mean, I think we laugh all the time at, a bunch of us who work there have kids and all the weird things they name stuff like pets and whatever. Yeah. Like we just had one kid name their cat Sushi McTuna. I was like, that's the best name ever for a cat. And, I mean, they're 10 and like, but now that cat's going to have to be that forever, But I mean, it's a cat. So like, who cares? It's a taxidermy bear. Yeah. It can be, as long as it's not like, offensive.
I think that was
all good.
That was the thing that was the most like impressive to me about it is like the restraint of all these people. Yeah. They voted for something that like pushed the envelope, but wasn't obscene or And
it's it just reminds us that really at heart we're all like 12.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to remember.
Well, sweet. Amy, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it very much. Yeah. We close all of our podcasts with an unpaid ad.
Okay.
Do you have someone, something, or some idea that you think deserves a little plug today?
I think the Sinclair Lewis Foundation is the one I'd pick. Sinclair Lewis Foundation is an in-stock center, and it is a family organization that has promoted the work of this nationally renowned person in this very quiet, very kind of local way. Yeah. They host this amazing writers conference every year that draws international people to central Minnesota. And when you meet the people who are responsible for all of this, they're the most like humble, quiet people you'll ever know. So if you don't know about them, I would encourage you to learn about them.
My unpaid ad for the day in honor of museums. One of my favorite museum tours I ever did was in Dublin, Ireland, the Guinness Storehouse. The way that they kind of approached, and again, I didn't think about the fact that, again, this is a really storied company that, of course, has this incredible history that they've collected and curated. And, it just was some big company, But the museum itself is really beautiful. It's a tall building. And as you walk through the inside, there are no windows. It's dark, dark, dark and moody. And, of course, beautifully laid out. And it's kind of special. And then you get to the top and it's this thing called the Infinity Bar. Okay. And it's one of the taller buildings in Dublin, I think, and it's all glass on the top, and it's just a beautiful view. And then you get to the top, and if you want, you can drink a pint of Guinness while you're up there, looking at this view of Dublin. But the museum itself is shaped. You don't realize it kind of until you get to the top. It is shaped like a pint of Guinness. If you think of a pint of Guinness that gets set down on the table, it's dark, 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 dark. And then it's this like 1 inch, like white foam head on the top of that pint glass. The museum is meant to mimic what a pint of Guinness looks like.
That's so clever.
And I don't know, it just was special. It's just like, here's our history, here's a fun, and we're just going to write this kind of like, the script on this thing is that it's this fun, really beautiful kind of expression of what our product actually looks like. So
awesome.
If you end up in Ireland, go and check that out. And just in general, some of the best ways to get to know, if you're traveling, get to know a community, go and check out their museums. It's a pretty fun and pretty special thing.
It is.
Well, sweet. Thanks, Amy. Really appreciate having you on.
You bet.